this week/this month's Lunch and Learn, as you all know, we've got JD that's going to talk to us about prudent personal investing. Say that 5 times fast. Real quick, I do want to acknowledge Lay, who put on the food for today, and Kevin also, who right there. But without any further ado, Mr. Eacher, the time is yours.
Thank you very much. All right, so as Jesse mentioned, we're going to talk about prudent personal investing today. Now, we're going to go beyond just investing. We're going to talk about prudent personal financial management as it relates to investing. So it'll be a little bit of a broader scope than just investing, but hopefully there will be a lot of good learning, key learning takeaways from that. So, I'm going to start off by talking about an old book. This book was written in 1926. It's called The Richest Man in Babylon, and it's a book that teaches principles on how to build wealth. By show of hands, how many of you have heard of this book before? Okay, yeah, most people. So, in this, there is a guy named Arcad, and Arcad's kind of like the wealth creation guru guy. Like, everyone's going to him and saying, hey, Arcad, like, clearly you've got your stuff together. How do we get our stuff together? And so one of the first things that Arcad does in the book is he goes and he starts asking people, he's got this big group of people that he's talking to, and he asks them how much money is in their money purse. I guess back in Babylon, everyone carried around these money purses and had all the cash on them at all times. So the first person answers, yeah, I got $5. Then he asks somebody else, and the next person said, I got $7. Third person's like $2. And he asked a few more. It's like 5, 7, 12, 15, 8. But it was in this really small range of money. So then he started asking other random people, well, how much do you make? And the guy's like, 50,000. Another guy, how much do you make? 200,000. How much do you make? 750,000. And then so on and so forth. And he found that when he asked people, how much do you make, there was a wide variance in how much money people made, but a very small variance in how much people had. And so what is it that we learn from that story? Well, there's an aspect of human nature that we need to consider anytime we're talking about money. And that aspect is people tend to spend up to the extent that they have the ability to spend. Now, it's not everyone, it's not everything, this is not universal, but in general, people want to spend to the extent that they can. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and keep it in the back of your minds, because if you don't keep that in the back of your minds as you're trying to prudentially use your money, you can get into a lot of trouble real fast. So, what we're going to discuss today. First is financial priorities. And we'll talk about these in terms of buckets. And you want to fill up a bucket with your money first before it spills over to the next bucket. And you want to get certain ones filled before you move on to the next ones. And there is a logical order to this that is the best practice for how you should spend your money. We're also going to talk about taxes. Taxes have a huge impact on the amount of money you get as a return on your investment in terms of when you can retire or not. And so we're going to talk about some taxes best practices. We're also going to talk about credit scores briefly, and that is just because it's such an important topic to know at least a little bit about. Having a good credit score opens up opportunities and doors for you, and if you're in a bad spot with that, you can really be in a world of hurt. So, starting off with financial priorities. Today is everyone's lucky day. I'm just going to go out and say you've all found $100,000. On your way to work today, you picked up $100 grand, you got it, you stuck it in your pocket, and it's yours to do anything you want with it. Now, if I was hanging out with a friend or talking with somebody for fun, I might say, hey, you got $100,000, what would you do with it? And the expectation would be that they'd say, oh, I'd go on a trip to Jamaica, or I'd buy this really fancy car, and those would be awesome things for purposes of having a fun conversation. But that is not prudential or prudent financial management. So today we're going to talk about what you really should do if you got $100,000. And it's not going to be quite as glamorous, but it's going to outline and hopefully kind of show as an example what the correct steps you should take and priorities you should take when you have money. First thing you want to do is meet immediate financial obligations. We'll talk about what these are. This is just kind of setting the stage. Next thing, you want to protect against financial uncertainties. Again, we'll talk about what this means. Next thing, or the third bucket, again, if we're thinking of these as buckets that you fill up one before you spill into the other, is you want to take risk-free returns on your investment. Next, you'll go to putting your money to work. This is more traditional investing. And then finally, having some fun. So we will start talking about filling up these buckets, starting with meeting immediate financial obligations. So this is like at the core of if you have money and you need to spend it on something, people need food, clothing, and shelter to survive. Like this is the basic first step of spending money. If you don't have any and you get it and you need to buy something, you take care of the basic necessities of life. Which basic necessities of life? There is a wide variance with these things between wants and needs. So be very careful. There are a lot of people, like I said, we have 5 different buckets we're going to talk about. This isn't even like the full first bucket. And there are a lot of people that we get to this bullet point and all of their money has gone to food, clothing, and shelter. That's it. Their mortgage payment, their fancy clothes, and they eat out all the time. Like this is where their money, this is how many buckets they filled up, not even the first one. So there is a wide variance between food, clothing, and shelter that you need and food, clothing, and shelter that you may want. Go back to that example of ARCAD. How much is in your money purse? Well, you can spend a lot of it on these 3 things. The next thing we'll talk about is minimum on debt repayments. So if you do have a credit card or if you have student loan debt or even a mortgage, you want to be making sure you make the minimum payments on those as like your second priority. You take care of your food, clothing, and shelter, then you got to take care of your debt repayment obligations. That allows you to maintain a good credit score. It keeps options open for you so that you can do other things. And you're essentially in good standing financially in society if you can make your payments on your debts. And if you're not, you're in a bad spot. If you're not, you're getting collections agencies coming after you. It's hard to find a place to rent. It's impossible to own a place. Like, you need to take care of this as one of the first items in this first bucket. Last one on this first bucket is just paying your bills. And I know this sounds really simple and straightforward. We'll get to more advanced stuff, but this is kind of the walk before you run stuff. I do want to encourage you to remember to not let bill creep incur. So just like any company, or all companies are trying to upsell their customers so that their customers are more profitable to them. So any recurring payment that you have, any bill that you have, whether it's cable or internet or whatever it is, just be on the lookout for them trying to upsell you on things or gradually increase the rate. That's going to happen naturally to a certain extent, but you just want to make sure that your bills don't get out of control on things that you don't need. In addition, there's even companies that'll do this for you where they'll call on your behalf and try to negotiate rates for these monthly subscriptions and try to reduce down what the rates are. If you yourself want to do something, you can call up and ask if they have any preferential terms and how to meet them. And it's a way to potentially reduce your bills by taking a couple hours on Saturday to just call a couple of your providers and see if there are ways that you can be paying less money on monthly recurring bills. All right, protecting against financial uncertainties. The first bucket was like cover your basics. This one is like, hey, I don't always know what's going to happen to me financially, and I want to take some defensive measures to make sure that if certain things happen, I'm prepared for that. So this is where you get into things like insurance. The general concept on insurance is you want to insure what you can't afford to self-cover. And let me explain what that means. If I go down to Walmart and buy a TV, more likely, or more often than not, when I check out, they say, hey, do you want to add an extra $30 to get a warranty on this TV? Well, maybe the TV cost me $500, and I'm sitting there saying, well, I don't know, should I get that warranty or shouldn't I? It's an extra $30, it's a $500 TV. Like, what's the thought process that should go through my head? Well, I'll tell you what, at least what I've been instructed. The people who offer warranties have these really great actuarial tables to figure out and calculate exactly how much they need to charge each person who gets a warranty to make sure they make money, okay? So if they are charging an amount where the odds are in their favor, that means that the odds are not in my favor to purchase that warranty. As long as I have another $500 sitting around somewhere where I can pay for a new TV if the worst were to happen, assuming that a TV was mission critical for my life. Does that make sense? Like, if I have enough money to be okay, even if the object is destroyed, I shouldn't pay a small fee to insure against that. That same principle applies even with things like health insurance. So if I have health insurance, like, generally speaking, if I know I'm a reasonably healthy person and don't have too many issues, I want to have a high deductible on my health insurance that's as high as it can go, that I can still self-cover whatever that deductible amount is. Because if I can self-cover it, it means that my monthly payments to have that insurance are lower. And in the long run, I'm going to be better off, statistically speaking. Now, you could have something terrible happen, and you may find out you have cancer. And you may need to spend up to, you have a high deductible, let's say it's $5,000. Yeah, you're out $5,000. But you're not out the hundreds of thousands of dollars that those cancer treatments are going to cost you because you have insurance. Now, if you have things like you need to go to the doctor for a cold, or you feel a little sick, like, if you have enough money lying around to cover what it would take to go to a doctor for a normal visit, you don't need your insurance to be covering those smaller visits, if that makes sense. You're self-insuring against those, and you're letting insurance do its job of protecting against what you can't afford to protect against. Any questions on that concept? I'll add one caveat to it. It's not always bad to get warranties. My personal example of sometimes you got to break the rules is a few years ago, I bought a car that I thought that had a reputation for breaking down. And I said, well, I'm going to pay the $2,000 for a warranty on this. And over the 3 years that it was covered under warranty, there were about $10,000 in damages and repairs that needed to happen. So I made out like a bandit because I paid for the warranty in that case. So use a little bit of judgment, but normally the rule is don't try to self-insure to the extent that you can. Disability insurance is an important one. 1 in 3 people will need it at some time in their life. Life insurance is one where unless you have dependents, you don't need life insurance. But once you do have dependents, you want to have enough to cover their needs in the absence of you being around. So those are some things on life insurance, guys.
Do you have a length of time on that? You know, like cover their needs for how long?
Probably until they're 18.
What about if it's just a wife or a spouse that would be technically considered dependent? You know, make sure that funeral expenses are covered, or you know, is there a good rule of thumb on that? 6 months.
Funeral expenses, again, if you, ideally, we'll get to this in a second, but ideally you have an emergency fund that would cover funeral expenses. And so if that's the case, you don't need life insurance unless your spouse can't or is unable to work. If they're unable to work, can't get a job, you would want to have life insurance to help cover that need. Other questions? Which brings it right to the emergency fund. This should cover 6 to 8 months of expenses with no income. This is because there's an uncertainty of whether we'll all have jobs one day or the next. Like, any of us could or could not be working tomorrow. And your emergency fund helps you just in case the worst is to happen.
You know something we don't.
Probably an unwise, since we're closing on funding today, it's probably an unwise day for me to choose to bring this up. But that's ideally what it should be covering. You want this in a highly liquid, safe account. You don't take your emergency fund and put it in the stock market. You put it in like an online savings account that earns you maybe 1 to 2% interest. This is not money that you like put into your down payment in your house, because that's really not very liquid to get out. This is money that's in like a savings account that you can get access to quickly. Will and estate plans, just really quickly, this is ensuring that your money goes where you intend it to go if you were to pass away, and also ensuring that your children will be taken care of by the persons whom you want to be taken care of. Sure.
Regarding a will, what is actually necessary to have something be legally recognized as a will?
In the state of Utah, I think you just need like a signature on it. I don't even think it needs to be notarized. But that I'm drawing on knowledge from college, which was a long time ago. Each state is different in the legal requirements. But you could write some things on a piece of paper right now, sign it, and I think that's a valid will. Don't quote me on that.
Do you have suggestions on like an inexpensive route to go for a will? Like, are there online documents or anything to do that?
I think there are online documents. I don't know of any off the top of my head, but a Google search should yield something. Questions? Okay. All right, so we made it through our first two buckets, taking care of immediate financial needs, then taking care of any like, financial uncertainties that may come up. Now we're going to go talk about taking risk-free returns on investment. So this is contributing to your 401k up to your employer match. And we don't have a 401k canopy right now, but if we ever add one or if we ever work somewhere else, contributing money to your 401k, you're essentially getting free money because your employer is willing to match some of your contribution percentage. And again, even though this is free money, this is something you do after you get your emergency fund set up. Because even though I'm getting free money here, I can't touch it until I'm 59 and a half. And if I have an emergency, I need cash today. So again, it's great and dandy that this is free money. That's awesome. But if you don't have your emergency fund set up first, and you have $1 and you can decide whether to put that $1 in the 401k or into the emergency fund, you put the $1 in the emergency fund. This is also a backdoor method for increasing Roth IRA funding. This is kind of a more advanced topic, but essentially you have limits on your Roth IRAs that are lower than what you can do in a 401k. And so if you feel like tax rates are going to be higher when you retire, you want to have things structured in Roth vehicles. We'll talk about this a little bit more later. But there's lower limits on those, what you can contribute annually. So what you can do is contribute to something like 401k and then roll that over into a Roth IRA and kind of you're able to pump more money in there than what the contribution limit would otherwise allow you to do. The next item on taking risk-free returns on your investment is paying down high-interest debt. So essentially, you have to think of this kind of backwards, where a normal investment, you're earning a percentage. This is when you're paying down debt, you are removing the obligation to pay a percentage. And removing the obligation to pay a percentage essentially is the same as earning a percentage. So if you're paying some kind of credit card debt at some upwards of 12, 13, 14%, paying down that credit card debt using your dollar to do that is just as good as going and trying to find an investment where you're earning 12, 13, or 14%. So it's, and the benefit of paying down debt is there's no risk in that. Like if you try to earn a 12, 13, 14% investment or return on your investment, there's going to be risk associated with that. Whereas if you're paying down debt, you are getting 12% guaranteed. Now that doesn't always, you don't always want to pay off debt though. And what I'll say is you're usually around 8%. Anything higher than that is a pretty good place to start paying it down. However, you only really want to pay down debt if it exceeds the return on investment that you're getting from an investment. So what I mean by that is, well, here's just a few different types of debt: education debt, car debt, and mortgage. Mortgage debt can be like between 3 and 5%. Car debt I've seen between 1 and 3%. Education debt I think is a little bit higher. But let's say you've got car debt at 2%, and you've got an investment that's earning you 7%. Well, should you pay down, and you've got $1, and you can use that dollar to pay down your car debt or put it into this investment account that's earning you 7%. Yeah, you get a risk-free 2% return by paying down your car debt, but your opportunity cost of doing that is 7% that you could be earning in your investment. Now, you may have some risk in that investment, and you need to factor that into your decision of where you put your dollar. But ideally, if you do get that 7% return, you have what's called a spread. You have a 7% on your investment, 2% on your debt, and that gives you a 5% spread. Or in other words, you're 5% better off by taking your dollar and putting it in the investment than into the car payment. And so if you think about it like that, like having a loan on your car isn't necessarily a bad thing. You're borrowing other people's money and allowing that money to be put into investments. Now, if you're borrowing that money and you just have the cash sitting in under your mattress, well, you're losing 2% every month because you have your cash sitting under a mattress. But if you found an investment vehicle that gives you 7%, you're better off by taking that other person's money, putting it in the investment that's 7%, and making a 5% spread on that dollar. Make sense? Any questions on that? Sure.
Quick question on the back.
Yeah.
Are you actually taxed on the rollover, or is that the back part?
You are taxed today when you go to roll it over. And that's okay because you're not going to be taxed 30 years from now when you pull it out. And we'll talk more about kind of whether you should do a Roth or a traditional in a little bit. We're at the point of putting your money to work. So retirement, or maybe we already talked about this. No, okay, yes. The first, so we're now to our fourth bucket, putting your money to work. We're no longer in like the risk-free mode. This is actual like, hey, I'm going to make some investments and I'm going to take some risks, and in return, I expect some kind of return on my investment. The best place to start in your risky investing is with retirement savings. These are vehicles that the government says, hey, we want to give preferences to people who want to put their money towards retirement. And so we'll give you these vehicles that you can invest in anything you want, wrap it around in a vehicle that we'll call a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA or a 401k. And as long as you have that wrapper around it, you can invest in anything you want, but we're going to give you special tax treatment for it. So when you start investing, the first place to start investing is your retirement accounts because they're tax advantaged. When you start doing this, you do want to diversify. We'll talk about diversification a little bit more when it comes in a minute, but you can pick a bunch of different stocks or you can just invest in an index fund. We'll talk about that in a little bit later on. I would recommend contributing the maximum every year, that you, at least to the extent you can, contribute to the limit that the IRS or the government allows you. Contribute to that limit, because every year that you don't, you lose the ability to put money into that vehicle. So get it in every year and stuff it with as much as they'll let you. Because if you can get tax advantaged returns on your investment, you are significantly ahead of the game relative to just taxable returns on your investment. The next thing, to put your money to work, like we're all the way, this is our fourth bucket, right? And now we're just starting about buying a house. I view, and people will differ on this one because They say renting is just throwing money out. I don't know that I fully agree with that. Buying a house, if you're not going to live there for at least 3 years, there's a good likelihood that you're going to lose money by buying that house or be in a worse position than you would have otherwise been by renting. So, rule of thumb is it takes 3 years to cover the cost of a purchase. One thing that I would recommend is if you can find a house that needs a little bit of fixing up and you're willing to put some sweat equity into it, you can really accelerate your return on investment and not have it be 3 years, but maybe even be 3 months if you can get work done quickly, where you're ahead of the game relative to the loan that you've taken out. It is also a good way to keep yourself from going upside down if you're able to do a little bit of work on a house. This is something I read in, I think, Rich Dad, Poor Dad years ago, where what they would do is find homes that they could add an additional bedroom to quickly and easily, and then get what's it called when they come and they appraise it? They come and get the property appraised, and now if they added a 4th bedroom to what was a 3rd bedroom, now the appraisal comps are relative to 4-bedroom homes instead of 3-bedroom homes, and you can bump the appraised value up significantly because the comps are all up at a different level. Once you get a higher appraisal, you can then refinance the loan and take out a chunk of the equity that you've earned just by adding that additional bedroom. And if you really want to play the game aggressively, you then roll that into another property, you do the same thing, you get the appraised chunk to go up, you refinance, you take the money out, you just wash, rinse, and repeat, and you can build up a nice little slew of rental properties. Again, that's a little bit more advanced, but it's something that I wanted to at least mention. There are some rental property tax benefits that we'll talk about a little bit. Okay, I'm going pretty fast. Everyone still with me? Okay, and the first item here that we're going to talk about is investing. All right, so have any of you ever considered or thought of what is the difference between investing and gambling? You know, it's something that it's hard for me to get my head wrapped around, and it's something that this is at least the way to me that I feel like the best way to understand it is, so I'm going to try to do my best to explain my understanding of the difference between gambling and investing. So let's first talk about investing. So if we are investing in something, think of that as like the grease on the wheel to human ingenuity. So what do I mean by the grease on the wheel of human ingenuity? Essentially, when we look at society, we have people who come up with ideas. And in order for those ideas to get traction and actually be built, they need fuel. And the fuel to create those ideas comes in the way of investments. So if I'm an investor, essentially I look at an idea and I say, I look at that idea almost like it's a machine. And if I take $1 and I put it through that machine, it's going to come out with something more valuable than the initial dollar that I put in it. And so what is it that creates that additional value? Well, it's the ability for people to take ideas that allow other people to make progress in their lives. And so again, when I'm investing, I'm taking $1 and I'm giving it to someone who has an idea that will be able to take that initial dollar, use their human ingenuity, and produce something that allows society as a whole to make additional progress. And if we look at what that additional progress looks like in terms of a return on investment, we actually know what human ingenuity's return on investment is. It's between 8 and 10% annually. Well, how would I say that? Why would I say that? Well, if you look at the S&P 500 index, that is the top 500 companies in the United States, and the annual return that it produces year over year over a long period of time is 8 to 10%. And so what that story is telling is that if you have investments and you put it into this machine of human ingenuity, it will spit out 8 to 10% annually over a long period of time. Now, within that 8 to 10%, not every single company is earning exactly 8 to 10%. You have winners and you have losers. You have some companies that are earning 20%, other companies 5%, others negative 20%. And so when you get into The other end of what we're talking about here, the gambling end, gambling is trying to pick the winners and losers amongst that group. And so if you decide to play that game, you just need to be aware of what you're up against. We as Canopy employees are working 8 hours a day on our product. The people who are out there in the investing community are spending 8 to 10 hours a day trying to learn, or maybe even more, trying to learn everything they can about every single company in that S&P 500 index fund. So what you are essentially doing is you're trying to compete. If you think that you can make investment decisions that are better than them, you know, each transaction requires a buyer and a seller. In this case, if I think a company is going to do well, I'm a buyer, and that means that somebody on the other end of the table is selling. And if they're selling, they have reasons that they believe that the stock is going to go down. And so who has more information when I'm making these kinds of picks? Is it me, the Canopy employee, who spends 8 hours of my day doing something else? Or is it professional investors who are spending 8 or more hours of their day trying to figure out which stocks are going to be the winners and which ones are not? Well, again, if I'm going to invest and invest within a framework that I know I'm going to win, I'm going to invest in a broad, diversified area of stocks where I know that on average, the human ingenuity that's going through those stocks is going to give me an 8 to 10% return. If I decide that I'm going to try to pick and choose the ones of those 500 companies that is going to be the best or the worst, if I'm going to short it, I might as well go down to the roulette table and put my money all on red or all on black, because I'm making a bet or I'm making a prediction about whether the price is going to go up or down, and I'm probably the one who has less information about that than the person sitting on the other end of the table. So anyway, that's a little bit of an overview of my views on investing versus gambling. To kind of put a bow on it, if I'm investing, I am putting my money into a broad market that has enough diversification to allow that 8 to 10% of human ingenuity to work. And I know that the odds are in my favor that I will receive that return on my investment. If I'm gambling, I'm picking one or two of these different stocks, and I'm saying, I think you're going to be a winner, I think you're going to be a loser, and I'm trying to pick on an individual basis which one's going to win and which one's going to lose. And if I do that over time, I may get lucky every once in a while, but if I do it enough, I'm subject to the law of averages, and the person sitting on the other end of the table is more likely to have information that I don't have, and is more likely to win more often than I do. I hope that makes sense. Again, it's a concept that's a little hard for me to wrap my head around sometimes, but again, hopefully that explains a little bit behind the difference between investing and gambling. So to kind of flesh that out a little bit more, we talked about what the S&P 500 index is. 2/3 of these people, this is kind of an oh by the way, 2/3 of the people who are paid to spend all day, every day figuring out the winners and losers end up performing worse than just taking that average 8 to 10% that the S&P 500 index is going to return. So again, if you're sitting out there wanting to know a framework for prudential or prudent personal financial management and investing, just take the average. Don't try to beat the system. You're unlikely to do so. There's also tax advantage education savings plans, so you want to keep that in mind when you're doing investing. You can put those in those vehicles. One other thought is to never have an investment that's larger than 2 to 5% of your total investable assets. And a couple things to keep in mind as far as age and when you should be doing what. When you're younger, you can afford to assume more risk. In case the stock market goes down or something like that, you have more working years to make up for any dips that may occur. And so you want to be in riskier assets. As you get older, that changes. And so when you get older, you want to create fixed income streams. You don't have as much time to weather out some storms. And so annuities are a good way to do that. Annuities have gotten kind of a black eye 10, 15 years ago. There was some bad press about them. As they've continued to evolve, they actually have been viewed more favorably by investors. One thing I'll add is that if you do want to get into an annuity, you want to go through a fiduciary to do that rather than just a insurance salesperson. Fiduciaries are legally required to do something in your best interest, and especially in the realm of annuities, there are enough gotchas within the different investment vehicles that are out there that going through a fiduciary is a more prudent way to approach this. This is one that is a personal belief of mine, but I believe that you can invest in people by sharing with them, giving them stuff, kind of helping them out when they're having a hard time. In my experience, it feels like in life when I'm investing in other people, that ends up coming around to benefit me later on. Now, that's not necessarily the reason you do that, but I think that it is something to keep in mind. Investing in other people really can provide true returns on that investment later on in your life. That's it. So, we've talked about these first 4 buckets. Hopefully all of you know what the screenshot here refers to. It's a movie where, I won't say the name of the movie, but the guy was supposed to go just get the bare essentials in life. He came back with all kinds of fun things like big Mexican hats and other stuff. Anyway, once you've accomplished or once you've filled up the first 4 buckets that we've talked about today, money is meant to be spent. You're allowed to have fun with it, and life is a whole lot better if you do. And so, I came up with a list of things that maybe I would want to do if I'm in this 5th bucket. Some of these might resonate with you, some of them might not. This is my list of some things you can do for fun. One is going on vacation, buy a nice car, get involved in hobbies, purchase some fancy sunglasses, wear designer clothing, invest in Bitcoin. Notice, everyone, that this is when you invest in Bitcoin, not way back on any of those other buckets. This is the time when you are allowed to invest in something like Bitcoin. It's a risky investment. Anyway, you can set off fireworks, you can buy a foosball table, you can get the latest and greatest technology. And just as an overall point on this last 5th bucket, remember that money is a renewable resource. You can make more of it. And so make sure you're doing your best to live a full, fulfilling life and use money to help you in that quest. So yeah, that's all I have to say about this last bucket. Taxes. Okay, well, taxes have a huge impact on your investments and on your life. And so we're going to talk about some tax strategies, starting with the bunching of itemized deductions. This is important particularly with the new tax changes that have recently come out. And so we'll go through an example. First, standard deduction for a single taxpayer is $12,000. Used to be about $6,000, and for married filing jointly, it's up to $24,000. So I'm going to go through an example where I'm going to, well, first, if you don't have more than the standard deduction amount for your itemized deductions, then you don't get any benefit of having itemized deductions. Essentially, every year there's a little bit of a race between your standard deduction and your itemized deductions to see which one wins. And if you have a higher standard deduction than your itemized deductions, you take the standard. You have more itemized, you take the itemized. And so as an example, let's say that I make a $10,000 contribution to charity every year. And last year, in 2017, that worked out great for me. And let's say that was my only Schedule A or itemized deduction item. Last year, that would have been great. I had $6,000 as a single guy. I had $6,000 or so standard deduction. I had a $10,000 charitable deduction. And I have, by doing more itemized deductions, I get a $4,000 extra deduction on my tax return that I wouldn't have gotten by having a standard deduction. Well, flash forward to 2018, and all of a sudden, I want to make that same $10,000 charitable contribution. Well, if I do that, I'm going to get to the end of the year, and I'm going to say, okay, I've got $10,000 for my itemized deductions, but now I've got $12,000 as my standard deduction. And so what is the benefit that I got, at least from a tax perspective, of giving that charitable donation? Well, it's nothing. And so all of a sudden, this thing that last year gave me $4,000 extra deduction gives me 0 extra deduction. So what do I want to do about that? One thing that I can do, one thing that I recommend is a practice called bunching your donations. And so let's say in 2018 I want to give $10,000, in 2019 I know I'm going to want to give $10,000 again. Rather than making any payments in 2018, I can write out a check on January 1st, 2019 for $20,000. And what that does is in 2019, I'm now able to take I have itemized deductions of $20,000, where my standard deduction was $12,000, and now I have an $8,000 benefit relative to my standard deduction. And then the next year I take the standard deduction, I do the whole thing over again, and I bunch my deductions again. And every other year I'm taking the standard deduction, and then the other year I'm taking the itemized deductions. This is a great strategy, especially in light of the new tax changes that have come out. Again, this is what we just talked about. For retirement planning, one of the things that you always want to look for with your taxes is trying to find ways to not have to pay taxes on money. And what the IRS has said is that we want to encourage certain behavior, and one of those behaviors is retirement planning. And so what they do to encourage retirement planning is if you want to invest in a retirement vehicle, the IRS won't tax you on the earnings of it, or they'll give you a tax benefit today, depending on if you're doing a Roth or a traditional IRA, 401k, and so on and so forth. So, when you're trying to decide whether you're doing a traditional or a Roth, basically, if you work out the math, what you're trying to determine is, do you think that your tax rate is going to be higher when you retire or today? And in most cases, for most people, their tax rate is expected to be higher later on in life. And so a Roth 401k, Roth IRA is better suited for individuals, again, when you expect the tax rates to be higher when you're pulling the money out in retirement. I do also want to kind of give some practical advice that opening up a Roth IRA or some of these other things is not very hard. If you go to a site like Vanguard, there's like a big button that says click here to open a Roth IRA. You do that, you pick an investment, and that could be like an S&P 500 index fund, and you just say, okay, I want to invest, let's say you're invested maximum, you invest $55,000, $5,500, transfer that from your bank account into your Vanguard account. You purchase that index fund, it's wrapped in the Roth IRA wrapper, and within 10 minutes, you have a Roth IRA going. It's not a very hard process, and every year that you don't contribute to your these retirement plans, you lose the opportunity to put money into that type of vehicle. So anyway, that's just some practical advice on the retirement plan. All right, continuing on taxes, maximizing rental property deductions. You can get into some very gray lines here. I'm not going to get into what my high school economics teacher talked about. He would kind of advocate buying things for rental properties, putting them into your own property, and then if the IRS audits you, driving out with your property that was supposed to be in the rental all along, and you had it in your own home, and he said, hey, they don't just knock on your door and say they're going to audit you, they give you a heads up, so you got plenty of time to move it over. Again, I do not advocate doing that. However, there are some things that you can do with rental property deductions, particularly if there's a place that you like to go for vacation and you know you like to go there every year. Consider purchasing a vacation property that you can rent out to others, and then you have a business, you're a rental property business. The key to maximizing deductions when you do these type of rental properties is to make sure that you rent it or use it yourself for less than 15 days or 10% of the total rental days, whichever of those two is great. You can also rent your primary residence. One example is to a business we'll talk about in a second. Essentially, the government allows you to rent your personal residence up to 14 days, and if you don't rent any more than that, all of the income you make in that time period is tax-free. So things like Airbnb. Let's say you live by a football stadium and visiting team fans come 6 times a year, 7 times a year to come watch their team play. You could rent your house out 6 or 7 times and earn a bunch of income on that, and you don't pay any tax on it. It's a nice little thing to know about. You can also rent your personal residence to your own business for conferences, say monthly. So how this would work is, let's say I have a small business and I want to get all my employees together once a month to talk about stuff. If I want to do something like that, I can rent from, or I can write out a check from my business to myself as an individual and do that up to 14 times. I need to have enough documentation to support what market rates are for renting a conference center. I need to make sure I'm taking minutes so that I'm showing that I'm actually having a meeting. But what I'm doing is taking business income that would otherwise be taxable as ordinary business income, and I'm converting it into personal non-taxable income in the form of rental, in the form of rent. Because my business can then write off the amount as a deduction, and I am taking it in as income as a person, but I don't have to recognize it because it's fewer than 14 days. Again, there aren't a ton of ways to get truly tax-free money in our tax system. This is one of them, and it's a strategy to be aware of. Continuing on the third slide for taxes, it's important to know what the short-term versus long-term holding periods are for capital gains purposes. So if you hold something for 1 year or less, you're going to be taxed at ordinary tax rates. If you hold something for a year or more than a year, it is taxed at preferential rates at a maximum of 20%. If your marginal tax rate is higher than that, obviously you're saving quite a bit of money. Charitable contributions. This is, if you have the opportunity to make a charitable contribution in terms of, or in the form of long-term appreciated stock, I highly recommend that strategy. To the extent possible, you should try to never make a donation to a charity unless it's long-term appreciated stock as opposed to cash, and I'll explain why. So essentially, if I have, let's say I went out and I bought stock for $8,000 and that appreciated up to $10,000, I could sell the stock for $10,000, pay capital gains tax on that $2,000, and then donate the remaining amount to my charity. Or alternatively, I can just have the $10,000, donate it directly to my charity. They can turn around and sell it the same day and pay no tax on it because they're a charitable organization that doesn't pay taxes. So they are able to take the full $10,000, you're able to give a donation of the full $10,000, and that $2,000 that otherwise would be taxed is never gets seen by the tax man. And that's not illegal, that's not shady, that is perfectly on the up and up, and it's a way for you to not have to pay tax on your capital gains. And if you're going to be making charitable contributions anyway to organizations, then it's just a smarter way to do it so you don't have to pay any tax along the way. Again, this last bullet, I was a little premature in bringing that up. And don't forget to bunch your multiple years of donations together like we talked about a little bit earlier. Primary residence exclusion, this is another great one to know about. If you live in your in a property for 2 out of the last 5 years as your primary residence, then you get to exclude up to $250,000 of gain or appreciation, or if you're married, filing jointly, it's up to $500,000 of gain. Again, this is something where if you want to move every 2 years and have a new primary residence and make sure you're selling those residences within that 5-year window, you can get a bunch of gains really quickly and not have to pay any tax on them. Now, there's other factors to consider. Obviously, moving is a hassle. Like we talked about earlier, there's kind of a 3-year rule on how, what the break-even point on buying and selling a home, or buying a home versus renting. So anyway, there's other considerations, but be aware of this, this way to not have to pay tax. The last thing I'll point out is hopefully, as we've talked about some of these things today, you've learned something new about taxes. I'm a guy who doesn't even prepare taxes anymore professionally, and there's a lot of people who spend every day, all day, their entire lives learning the tax code, and they can tell you a lot of really great tips and tricks if you're bringing in your stuff to be prepared by an actual preparer every once in a while. Again, you look at it and say, oh, but I got to pay a guy and it costs a bit. Yeah, but hopefully I've outlined at least a few things that are strategies that you would be able to learn from your tax person, tax preparer, and it is worth it at least every few years to bring your stuff into a tax professional for them to help you out on some of this stuff. All right, credit score. We'll go through this pretty quickly. These are the factors involved in your credit score. You've got on-time payments, credit usage percentage, average age of your credit, new credit, credit mix. I don't really need to focus too much on the factors other than to make you aware of them. I do want to spend a couple more minutes on things you can do to improve your credit score. So, first thing, get your annual credit reports. These are a few free places you can go: annualcreditreport.com, big.com, creditkarma.com. There's a bunch of them. Go to that and figure out if there's any blemishes on your report that you need to fix. Call and clear any incorrect or outdated information. Call and raise your credit limits. This one's a pretty easy one. Let's say that you have a credit card that has a $30,000 limit on it, and you have $20,000 of charges on it. Well, on that credit usage factor for your credit score, they're going to see that you're using 66% of your credit limit, at least on that card. Well, if you call up your credit card companies every quarter-ish, you can ask them to raise your credit limit. And so let's say I call up my credit card company and I say, hey, can you bump that $30,000 limit up to $40,000? You know, I don't know that they'll go all the way up to $40,000, but let's say they do. All of a sudden you've changed your credit usage from 66% down to 50%. And that's going to help your credit score. And if you're calling every quarter or so to raise your credit limits, they're going to more likely than not allow you to keep raising those limits. You got to take the time to make a phone call, but it allows you to have an improved credit score if you're doing that regularly. Avoid closing accounts where possible. Again, they like to see that you have a long history of using credit, and so closing accounts kind of shuts off that ability to continue using it in your history. Avoid putting payments on a credit card if you're being close, if you're close to maxing out on them. That goes to that credit usage percentage again. Get caught up on the latest unpaid bills. We want to really knock that out. We talked about that in kind of our first bucket. Pay your bills, get that taken care of, because otherwise you're going to get your credit score hurt. If you are in a really tough spot, don't be afraid to contact your credit cards to discuss the hardship programs that they have. That's a way that they work with individuals to help them get out of bad spots. Also, just be patient and relentless if you are in a bad spot. And the last thing I'll mention is to take advantage of credit card programs. There are a lot of like free points and miles and things, and well, more often than not, you're okay to open those up. It's not going to affect your credit score negatively if you have a bunch of those cards. If they do have annual fees associated with them, you want to consider closing them out so that you're not getting charged with the annual fees. But otherwise, you can really get a lot of good deals if you're opening up different credit cards. All right, we are at the end. So just to recap, money is not evil. We talked about the prioritization of using it and how we have five different buckets to put that money to use in terms of priorities. But it is not evil. Use it wisely. Prioritize your spending to allow yourself to enjoy your money. Don't neglect your tax planning, and take the necessary steps to improve your credit score. That's all I've got.